My name is Elias Voss, Sergeant Major, Earth Coalition Ground Forces, 3 wars, 11 campaigns, one very specific reason why my commanding officers eventually stopped arguing with me about which postings I volunteered for. I am standing in a prep room the size of a supply closet on Cathara Station, listening to 32 species from across the known galaxy tell each other how much they respect one another through a wall that does almost nothing to muffle sound. My translation earpiece is processing 11 languages at once. I have a headache behind my left eye that has been there since the jump from Kepler Station and has no intention of leaving. I am doing an armor check. Not because I am nervous. I have been doing armor checks every morning for 19 years. Stopping now would feel like forgetting my own name. Left pauldron, right pauldron, chest plate, abdominal section, hip guards, greaves, gauntlets. The left pauldron has a dent. Wide, shallow, the exact shape a support strut makes when it comes down wrong at the wrong angle. I run my thumb across it the way I always do. Not because I am thinking about where it came from, because I always do. My armor is old. I know it is old. Everyone in that ceremony hall is going to know it the moment I walk through the door. The Veth sovereignty delegation arrived in full ceremonial plating that looked like someone had poured liquid starlight into a mold and waited for it to harden into something dignified. The Calorin collective fighters wore living crystal armor that shifted color with the wearer's emotional state. 3 of them had been glowing warm gold since arrival, which the briefing sheet told me meant contentment and confidence combined. Mine is composite alloy, scratched. The calibration lines along the left bicep are hand-stitched because that sensor array burned out during the Marin corridor operation 6 years ago, and the field repair held well enough that I never replaced it. I am not here to impress anyone. That is not modesty. That is the actual briefing I received before departure. The Earth Coalition diplomatic attaché, a thin man named Owen Carr who sweat continuously and always smelled like recycled station air, sat across from me on the transport and said, in the tone of someone trying to say something important while carefully avoiding the real thing, that my role at the Cathara summit was largely symbolic. I asked him to define symbolic. He said, choosing words the way people do when they know words have consequences, that I was there to demonstrate human participation in the coalition, to show respect for the gathering, to represent Earth's commitment to ongoing dialogue between species. I looked at him for a moment. I said, fair enough. He looked relieved. He should not have been. He thought I had agreed with his framing. I had not agreed. I had simply decided that correcting his framing was not worth my energy at that particular moment, on that particular transport, with that particular headache already developing behind my left eye. My role at the Cathara summit was not symbolic. My role was the same as it had always been, on every posting, in every room, across 3 wars. I was the thing humanity sent into spaces where things might go wrong, so that if things went wrong, something was already there that knew how to handle it. The armor was part of that. Every dent and scratch and hand-stitched repair was part of that. The ceremony hall held approximately 400 delegates, military representatives, and diplomatic observers from 32 coalition member species. It was a wide, circular room with a ceiling that opened to a full transparent dome. The star field outside came through in complete, unfiltered color. Someone had designed this intentionally. It was beautiful. I spent 38 seconds looking at it, then returned my attention to the room. 2 diplomats I had met briefly on the transport had taken positions near the center of the floor. Petra Cole, an aide attending her first coalition summit, stood slightly behind them and was working very hard not to look like this was her first coalition summit. Owen Carr had located the nearest emergency exit within 30 seconds of entering the hall, which I respected him for in spite of everything else. I had taken my own position near the outer edge of the floor, close enough to the gathering to fulfill my purpose. far enough to maintain a clear line of sight to all 4 entry points and to every member of the Veth sovereignty delegation present in the room. The Veth had brought 12 representatives. 11 of them were experienced officials and senior military figures with decades of coalition service between them. The eldest and most senior was the sovereign consulate herself, a woman named Kayla, who had held her position for 43 years and was described in nearly every briefing document I had read as someone who exercised exceptional restraint. The 12th was younger than all the rest combined. Her name was Zara, third in line of succession to the Veth throne, 22 years old by human reckoning, though the Veth calendar ran differently and I had done the conversion twice to be certain. She had completed her formal military education the previous year, graduating at the top of her class. Every report I had reviewed described her as brilliant, exceptionally gifted, and in the precise diplomatic language that always means exactly what it says, someone who had not yet encountered a situation she was unable to manage. I had noted all of this. I was running my thumb over the dent in my left pauldron when my earpiece caught a conversation from 12 feet to my left. 2 junior Veth aides, speaking in their own language, voices dropped to the level people use when they believe they cannot be heard. The earpiece translated, "Is that their fighter, or did the waste processing unit develop self-awareness?" Soft laughter, flagged as organic humor by the translation algorithm. I noted it. I kept running my thumb over the dent. Fair enough. The formal introductions began at the second bell. On Kethara Station, this was a low, resonant tone that arrived directly on top of my existing headache and sat there without apologizing. The format was the same as every coalition summit I had attended in a decade of these assignments. Each delegation's military representative was introduced to the room, recognized by rank and record, then introduced personally to the representatives of every other member species. 400 delegates, 32 species. The process would take no less than 3 hours. I had brought a ration bar. The Veth sovereignty made their introductory circuit first. The summit was being held in Veth-adjacent space, and diplomatic protocol extended them the gesture. Sovereign Kayla moved through the room with the economy of someone who had performed this ritual 100 times and had stripped it to exactly the size it needed to be. No excess warmth, no performed distance. Each exchanged the precise weight that the moment required. I watched her work. I noted that I respected it. She reached me in the middle of her circuit. We exchanged the coalition formal recognition greeting. She looked at me directly, which many species at these events avoided doing with human military representatives. The briefing materials had explanations for this. I did not find the explanations difficult to understand. She looked at the armor, at the dent in the left pauldron. She said nothing. She moved on. Her delegation followed. Zara was at the back of it, bioluminescence at a full, steady brightness, the kind of light that comes from confidence that has never been seriously tested. She was not moving with Kayla's economy. She moved the way young people move when they are certain the room belongs to them and see no reason to pretend otherwise. Easy, unhurried, comfortable with the attention that came with the light she was putting out. She reached me last. The rest of her delegation had already moved past. She stopped. She walked a slow half-circle around me, the way someone walks around a piece of old equipment in a museum they do not entirely understand but find interesting. She was not hostile, not yet, just curious in the way that does not yet know it is about to become something else. She asked through her translator, "Is this standard human military attire or a personal choice?" I said both. She tilted her head. Her translator must have flagged something unusual in the response because her expression shifted briefly, not irritation, recalculation. She reached out and touched the dent in the left pauldron with 2 fingers, the way you touch something old to check whether it is real. The damage has not been repaired, she said. No, I said. Why? It has not needed to be. She looked at me for a moment, then she looked at the room. The room was watching, not every eye but enough. The kind of attention that builds slowly around a scene that people have not yet classified. Her radiance brightened slightly. I ask this with respect, she said, in the voice of someone who believed that phrase was a kind of protection. But this attire seems inappropriate for an occasion of this standing. The human delegation sends their leading fighter, and he arrives in armor that appears to have been recovered from a salvage operation. The room noise dropped a level, not silence, just lower. I said in a way it was. I'm being serious, she said. So am I said. Her radiance pulsed once, sharp and brief, the way a light flickers when the power behind it shifts unexpectedly. Surprise, according to the briefing materials. She had expected either a defense or a concession. I had offered neither. What happened next I had read about in the behavioral analysis attached to her file. Reading about something and watching it happen 3 feet in front of you are different experiences. The behavior report was accurate. She straightened, not dramatically, just enough. Her voice carried further, not loudly, but in the deliberate way that means you want the words to reach the edges of a room. Perhaps it is also fair to ask, she said, whether the human delegation is truly prepared for a summit of this significance, if this is the standard of representation they consider appropriate. Every other coalition fighter present has arrived with honor visible in their attire. What this communicates, she gestured toward my armor, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse, is either a failure of preparation or a failure of respect for this gathering. The room shifted. Not loudly, not with any dramatic motion. The kind of collective adjustment that happens when a group of watching people has collectively decided what kind of thing they are watching. Several people laughed, not cruelly, the easy laugh, the comfortable kind, the kind that decides for itself which side of a situation it belongs to. I stood still. Both hands at my sides, I was looking at her. She was looking back at me, radiance high, entirely certain. 22 years old, top of every class, standing in a room of 400 witnesses and completely convinced that she was standing correctly. From 15 feet behind her, I could see Sovereign Kayla. Kayla was not looking at Zara. She was looking at my hands. Her radiance had gone down from what it had been during her circuit of the room, noticeably down. She had been watching since Zara stopped to circle me, and the light had been going steadily lower since. I noted this. I said to Zara, noted. That was all. She waited, there was nothing more coming. Her radiance pulsed again. Then she smiled, the smile of someone who believes they have finished something successfully, and said, I suppose the armor makes the point well enough on its own. She turned to rejoin her delegation. I stood where I was. I ran my thumb over the dent in the left pauldron. I had noticed a scratch on my right gauntlet earlier in the morning during the armor check. I still could not remember making it. 17 minutes later, during the mid-ceremony formal recognition round, Zara made her second move. She had been building to it, I realized, watching the conversation patterns across the room. She had made her first comment loud enough to be heard. She had gotten the laugh. She had tested the temperature of the room and found it agreeable. The second move was the escalation that the first one had made possible. She crossed the floor with 2 members of her entourage beside her, approached the spot where the human diplomatic group was standing, and spoke loudly enough for the nearest 20 delegates to hear clearly. She said that in the interest of the summit's dignity, she felt it necessary to raise a formal point, that the human delegation's military representative had arrived in attire that, by any coalition standard, was not appropriate to the occasion, that she said this with no personal disrespect toward the individual, but as a matter of the summit's integrity. that perhaps the human fighter should withdraw and return when his representation met the standard that all other delegations had honored. She paused, let it settle. Then she added with a small smile, or if the armor is purely decorative at this point, he could simply remove it. That might be equally appropriate. Several people laughed again. Petra Cole, standing 2 feet to my left, had gone completely still. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on Zara. Owen Carr, from somewhere near the exit he had identified earlier, had produced a small tablet and appeared to be typing something very fast. The room was watching me now, all of it, the full 400. The comfortable laugh had made them an audience, and audiences want to see what happens next. Zara stood with her radiance at its highest point yet. She looked like someone waiting to receive an answer that confirmed what she already knew. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at Sovereign Kayla, who had gone very still and very dim. I looked at the room. I reached up and unbuckled the right gauntlet. Nobody spoke. The right gauntlet came off. I turned it over once, checked it briefly the way I always did, then set it on the floor. Gently, not a throw, not a statement of any kind, the way you set down a cup when you are done with it. The room noise dropped further. I unbuckled the left gauntlet next, set it beside the first, reached up to the right pauldron and disengaged the lock at the shoulder joint. There is a sound that comes with removing full composite armor that you only know if you have worn it. A series of small mechanical releases, and a shift in the air around your body as the weight comes off in sections. It is not dramatic. It is very ordinary to the person doing it. I had performed this sequence 10,000 times in 19 years, and my hands moved through it without any participation required from my conscious attention. What was different this time was the audience. The room was not breathing the way it had been breathing before. I set the right pauldron on the floor beside the gauntlets, then the left one. I ran my thumb across the dent one last time as it left my hands, then I set it down. Chest plate next. The torso assembly took slightly longer because the secondary locking mechanism on the left side had been stiff since the Marin campaign, and I had never had it properly serviced. I worked it loose with practiced patience. The chest plate came free and I set it down. The abdominal section, the hip guards, the greaves. Each piece placed with the same care. Each piece placed flat on the floor of the ceremony hall of the Cathara summit, in front of 400 witnesses from 32 species, while the room held a silence that none of those 400 people could quite explain to themselves. I was wearing the base layer underneath. Practical fabric, dark gray, standard military issue, nothing ceremonial about it. No decoration. No insignia except the worn coalition patch on the left shoulder that had been through enough washes that the colors had faded to almost nothing. There was a scar along my collarbone that the armor had been covering. It ran from below the base of my throat to the top of my left shoulder. Wide. Old. The kind of scar that happens when something makes a very serious attempt to end you and only partially succeeds. I had not thought about the scar when I began removing the armor. I thought about it now, in the way you notice a thing when you realize someone else is noticing it. Several delegates near the front of the room were looking at it. I looked at Zara. She had stopped smiling. Her radiance had dropped so fast and so far that I could actually see the change, like watching a lamp being turned down. She was standing in the same position she had been standing in when I began. Her mouth was slightly open. She had expected a reaction to her challenge. She had expected either compliance, in the form of a withdrawal from the floor, or defiance, in the form of an argument about whether the armor was appropriate. She had not modeled this third option. 22 years in every classroom and briefing room available to the Veth sovereignty, and nobody had shown her this particular move. I looked at the room. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Not quickly. My boots made a slight sound on the floor, a small squeak from the left one that I had noticed earlier and made a mental note to address when I had time. I thought about that as I walked, about when I would find time to look at the boot. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said anything for several seconds, which in a room of 400 is a very long time. I was almost at the door when I heard Kayla's voice. One word in Veth. Quiet but carrying the way quiet things carry in a silent room. The earpiece translated it as child. Not the warm kind. The door opened, I walked through it. The corridor outside was empty, and the air was cooler, and the constant background noise of the ceremony hall was cut by the door closing behind me. I found a crate near the wall and sat on it. I reached into the inside pocket of the base layer and took out the ration bar I had put there that morning. I had gotten the flavors mixed up. I had two varieties, one I preferred and one I did not. I had picked up the wrong one without checking. I bit into it. I chewed. From inside the hall, through the wall, I could hear sound resuming. The low collective adjustment of 400 people returning to motion after something had stopped them. Conversations restarting. The particular frequency of a room trying to decide what it had just witnessed. I ate the ration bar I had not wanted and thought about the boot, and whether I had a repair kit in my pack, and whether I would have time to deal with it before whatever came next. From somewhere deeper in the hall, I could hear a voice. Kayla's voice. Not raised. Kayla did not raise her voice. It carried through the wall with the precision of someone who had learned, over 43 years, that the right volume for delivering important information was slightly below comfortable, so that the person receiving it had to stop everything else in order to hear. I could not make out words at this distance, only tone. The tone said, "You have made a serious mistake, and I am now going to explain to you why in full, without softening any part of it." I ate the ration bar. The boot squeaked when I shifted my weight on the crate. I would need to look at that. The corridor outside the ceremony hall on Cathara Station was built for utility. Gray walls, functional lighting, the kind of space that exists to connect important rooms to each other and has no ambitions beyond that. I had been sitting on the equipment crate for approximately 9 minutes when I heard footsteps approach and stop outside the hall door, and then the sound of a door being held slightly open rather than opened fully. Not coming out, just listening. The way someone stands in a doorway when they are not sure they should be in the corridor but are not sure they should go back inside either. I did not look up. The footsteps eventually went back inside. The door closed. I finished the ration bar and folded the wrapper carefully. I looked around for a disposal unit. There was none within sight. I put the wrapper in my pocket. Through the wall, Kayla's voice was still going, still at the same precise volume. I had been able to make out individual words through the wall for the last 3 minutes, because she had brought Zara to a position close to the partition and was delivering what she had to deliver without relocating to somewhere more private. Whether this was intentional, I could not say for certain. I thought it was intentional. The first thing I understood clearly through the wall was when Kayla said, in Veth, that there was a piece of history the princess had not been given access to in her formal education, and that this was not an accident. Zara said something I could not fully translate. Kayla said that it did not matter whether the princess understood the reason for it. The reason was protective. The reason was that there were things in the history of the coalition that were considered too useful to teach to the young, because the young inevitably tested what they were taught. Zara spoke again. I caught the word armor and the word symbolic. Kayla said no. One word, the translation came through clean. Then she said that the armor was not protection for the human inside it. It was communication. It was a message delivered to every species in every room he entered. It said, "Today, in this place, I have chosen to operate within the boundaries of the agreement we share. I am a soldier among soldiers. I accept the terms." I looked at my hands. Kayla's voice continued, still precise, still barely above a murmur, coming through the wall with perfect clarity. She said that humans did not experience pain the way other species did, not differently in the direction of less, differently in the direction of something that did not have a clean translation in Veth, something that the older languages in the Coalition archives rendered as the quality of not stopping. She said that the first time humanity entered Coalition space, there had been an incident, not a war, a misunderstanding between a human expeditionary unit and a garrison force from the Keth Collective that had been resolved, technically, but had left the Keth Collective with a need for 17 new garrison postings, because the previous ones were no longer available. She said there had been other incidents. She named none of them directly. She said that the records were in the restricted files of the Veth Historical Archives, and that Zara would be given access to them when she received the governance clearance that came with full succession, and not before. Zara asked something. Her voice was quieter than it had been inside the hall, not subdued exactly, more like someone who has realized they are reading a document that is longer than they expected, and the tone has changed about 3 pages in, and they are not yet sure what direction it is going, but they are beginning to understand that the direction is not the one they assumed. Kayla said that the last time a human military representative had been pushed to remove his constraints in a formal coalition setting, in front of witnesses, in a room full of people who believed they were watching theater, there had been consequences. She said the word consequences, and then she stopped and let the pause carry what she did not say. Zara asked what the consequences had been. Kayla said, "There are stars in the Kepler belt that we gave names to when we charted them, and which we no longer refer to by those names, because the events associated with them are not events we discuss in open session. We stopped using the names because the names became too closely tied to what happened near them." Another pause. She said, "This is not legend. This is in the archives, under the access restriction level above the one you currently hold." I was looking at the wrapper in my hand, folded neatly, and I was thinking about nothing in particular. Zara said something else. Her voice had changed. The quality that had been carrying through the wall earlier, the brightness of it, the absolute sureness of it, had come down several levels. She was asking something now the way people ask things when they have run out of the certainty that let them ask loudly. She asked, "Why does he not say anything? Why does he not argue? Why does he not respond the way anyone else would respond?" Kayla said, "Because he does not need to." Zara said, "Then what does he want?" Kayla said, "Nothing from you. He decided what he wanted before you finished speaking. That is the part you do not understand yet. You are 22 years old and you have been the most capable person in every room you have ever entered, and you have learned to expect that your actions require a response from the people they are directed at. Humans do not always respond where you can see it. He has already made his decision. Whatever happens in that hall now is the result of a decision that was made before you finished your first sentence." Zara was quiet for a moment, then she asked, "Is he dangerous?" Kayla said, "He came here in an agreement. The agreement was the armor. You asked him to remove it in front of everyone." Another pause. She said, "I will tell you something that is not in any official briefing document, and not in any file I have access to, because it did not come from a document. It came from an older Veth military advisor I studied under for 4 years when I was younger than you are now. A woman who had participated in 3 coalition-era negotiations involving human military representatives. She told me that there were 2 things she had learned to do when she was in a room with a human fighter. The first was, never ask him what he is capable of, because he will tell you accurately and you will not be prepared for an accurate answer. The second was, always make sure he has eaten something before anything complicated begins." Silence from Zara. Kayla said, "Pray he had a ration bar in his pocket." More silence. I looked down at the wrapper. I had eaten the wrong flavor. I should have checked before I left my quarters that morning. I put the wrapper back in my pocket. Through the wall, I heard a long, careful exhale from someone, and then the low sound of the ceremony resuming around them, conversation rebuilding. The 400 degrees of noise that a room of that size generated returning to its normal level. I sat on the crate. The boot squeaked when I shifted my weight again. I really needed to look at that. I sat in the corridor for 14 more minutes. I was not thinking about anything in particular. This was something I had learned to do a long time ago, in the spaces between situations, in the time that belongs to neither the last thing nor the next one. Sit. Let the body do what the body does when nothing is being asked of it. There are people who cannot do this. I had known a lot of them. They were usually the ones who wore out fastest. At the 14-minute mark, footsteps approached the corridor door again. This time the door opened fully. One set of footsteps, lighter than the ones from before. No entourage. I kept looking at the wall opposite me. The footsteps came level with me and stopped. I looked up. Zara was standing in the corridor without her entourage, without the brightness she had been carrying in the hall. Her bioluminescence was at its lowest point, barely visible, the kind of dim that happened when everything generating the light had been redirected to something more internal and more necessary. She looked at the armor pieces I had carried out of the hall and stacked neatly against the corridor wall. She looked at me. She said, "I owe you a formal apology." I said, "You don't owe me anything." She said, "My sovereign says otherwise." I said, "Your sovereign is not wrong about most things." Zara looked at the armor again, at the left pauldron specifically, sitting on top of the stack. She said, "May I ask what that dent is from?" I looked at her for a moment, not long, just enough. Then I said, "Marin Corridor 6 years ago." She did not ask what Marin Corridor was. She had probably just been told not to ask about certain things, and Marin Corridor was very likely on the list, and she was being careful in the way someone is careful when they have just received an education that rearranged the furniture in a room they thought they knew well. She sat down on the corridor floor, not near me, a respectful distance. She did not ask permission. She just sat, folding her legs in the Veth way, and looked at the armor stack. I said nothing. I let her sit. After a moment she said, "How long have you been a soldier?" 19 years, I said. "Did you choose it?" I thought about the question, not because the answer was complicated, but because it was the kind of question that deserved the actual answer and not the reflexive one. "Yes," I said, "my father was a soldier. His mother was a soldier. I grew up understanding that it was something you could choose to be, and I chose it. Nobody pushed me." She considered this. Her radiance was beginning to come back, very slowly, not the high brightness from the hall, something quieter than that. The kind of light a room has when someone turns on a single lamp in a corner instead of the overhead lights. She said, "The dent. You kept touching it during the ceremony." "I always do," I said. "Why keep it? The damage, I mean. Your technology could repair it." I picked up the left pauldron from the stack, turned it over in my hands. When the strut came down, I was in a section of the Marin facility that had already lost 2 support columns. The ceiling was coming apart in sections. I had 4 people I was responsible for getting out of a collapsing structure before a secondary event sealed every exit permanently. I set the pauldron back down. The strut hit the pauldron and knocked me down, and I got up and kept moving. The 4 people got out. That is the whole story. She was looking at the pauldron. "So you keep it because it reminds you," she said. "I keep it because repairing it would be like saying it did not happen," I said. "It happened. Dents are honest." She was quiet for a while. The corridor hummed with the low frequency of the station's systems. Somewhere deeper in the structure, ventilation cycled through a long, even breath. She said, "Were many people lost at Marin?" I said, "We don't use that word." She looked at me. I said, "Lost means you don't know where they are. We know exactly where they are. We just cannot reach them anymore." Something shifted in her face, not visibly dramatic, the small internal kind, the kind that happens when a sentence lands somewhere it did not expect to land. She said, "I am sorry for what I said in there." "You don't have to say it twice," I said. "I do," she said, "once for me and once for them." I looked at her. She said, "The ones at Marin." It seemed right. I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Fair enough." She looked at the armor. All of it, laid out in order against the wall, each piece exactly where it belonged relative to the others, as though at any moment it could be assembled back into the shape it held on the body. She said, "Sovereign Kayla told me something about the armor, about what it means." "What did she tell you?" "That it is an agreement. That wearing it means you have chosen to be one thing in a room full of things, and removing it changes what you are." I said, "That is close." She looked at me. "What would you add?" I thought about this, not about how to say it, about whether to say it at all and to whom, and whether this particular moment with this particular person was the right container for the full version of it. I decided it was. I said, "The armor tells everyone in the room that I came here as a soldier. A soldier has a role. A role has limits. It has a set of agreements built in about what you do and what you don't do and when and why. The armor is how I show that I accepted those agreements before I walked through the door." I let that sit. Then I said, "Most humans who go into military service are not dangerous people. They are disciplined people. Discipline and danger are not the same thing. What I mean when I say most is that there is a percentage of human fighters for whom the military is not the thing that shaped them. It is the thing that gave form to something that was already there. The military did not make those people capable of what they are capable of. It gave that capability a structure and a purpose and a set of limits." I looked at the armor. "I am that percentage," I said. "I know what I am. I have always known. The armor is what I wear to tell every room I walk into that today, in this place, I am choosing the limits. I am choosing to be the soldier and not the other thing." Zara had gone completely still. I said, "When you asked me to remove it in front of everyone for the sake of your ceremony, I made a decision. The decision was that the room needed to understand what the armor was before anyone said anything else. The most efficient way to communicate that was to show what removing it actually looked like." She said quietly, "You were not angry." "No," I said. "What were you?" A long pause. "Tired," I said. "I am tired in the way that happens when you have been doing something for a long time, and you are not finished yet, and you know you are not going to be finished for a long time still." She looked at her hands in her lap. She said, "I knew I was the most capable person in every room I entered. Kayla said this to me just now, and I knew it was true because every teacher I have ever had told me so. I believed it. I still believe parts of it. But I walked into a room today that had someone in it who had been doing something for 19 years that I have never once encountered in any room I have ever been in." I said nothing. She said, "How do you carry it? The weight of what you know about yourself." This was a real question. I could tell the difference between a real question and a performance question. She was 22 years old and she had just had the universe rearranged slightly, and she was asking it the way someone asks a question they genuinely do not have the answer to, and are not sure they are ready for the answer to, but are going to ask anyway because the alternative is carrying it without asking. I said, "The same way you carry most things. One day at a time. You build habits. You keep your word to yourself and to other people every day so that you have a record of having kept it. When you are unsure about yourself, you look at the record. The record is what you have instead of certainty." She said, "Is that enough?" I said, "So far." She almost smiled, not quite, something in that direction. She said, "I would like to make a formal apology in front of the delegation. To you and to the human delegation as a whole, Kayla has approved it. I said nothing. She said, does that matter to you, whether I do it publicly? I thought about this honestly. No, I said, the public part is for the room. It matters to the room. For me, what you said in this corridor is enough. Then I will do it for the room, she said. I looked at her. She was 22 years old. She had walked out of a ceremony hall without her entourage to find me in a corridor, sit on the floor, and ask real questions. This was not the behavior of someone who had done the convenient thing. The convenient thing would have been to stay inside where the 400 people were, and let the moment pass, and let time do what time does to uncomfortable moments. She had come here instead. I stood up. I picked up the chest plate first and began working backward through the sequence. Abdominal section, hip guards, greaves, right pauldron, left pauldron, which I paused at briefly before setting on my shoulder. She watched me put it back on. When I reached the gauntlets, she said, the scratch on the right gauntlet. When did that happen? I looked at the scratch. I had been looking at it all morning. I don't know, I said. Sometime in the last few months, I cannot place it. She said, that bothers you. A little, I said. I like to know where my dents come from. I buckled the right gauntlet. She stood up from the floor in one motion and straightened her clothing. Her radiance had come back to something close to its normal level, not the high bright from the ceremony, something steadier and more considered than that. The kind of light that comes from a person who has decided something and is no longer in the process of deciding it. She said, are you going back in? I buckled the left gauntlet. I said, yes. Can I ask why, after what happened in there? I thought about how to answer this. I thought about the actual reason and whether it was a reason that translated into language cleanly, or whether it was one of those things that lived in the space between words, the kind you can gesture toward but never fully hand to another person. I said, because walking away from a room does not fix the room. It just removes one thing from it. Coming back means the thing is still there, and the room has to figure out what to do with that. She considered this. She said, what is the thing? I said, the agreement. I walked out on it when I took the armor off. I am walking back in to put it back on the table. I picked up the chest plate and seated it and heard the familiar series of small locks engage. The weight settled on my shoulders in the way it always did. Heavy and familiar and exactly the right size for what I was. She said, the agreement matters to you, even after everything. I said, the agreement is why everything works. If I decide the agreement only applies when no one is testing it, then it is not an agreement. It is just a pose. She looked at me with an expression I could not entirely categorize. Not all, because all was too clean for what was on her face. Something more complicated. Something that had the shape of a person looking at an idea they had heard described before and realizing for the first time that someone actually lived inside it, day after day, without requiring anyone else to notice. She said, I want to be the kind of person who does what you just described. I said, you came out here and sat on the floor. You are already started. The almost smile came back. This time it became a real one, quiet and contained and nothing like the bright public smile from the ceremony hall, better than that one in every way that counted. She straightened. She walked toward the ceremony hall door. I walked beside her. At the door she stopped and said, when we go back in, the room is going to look at both of us. I said, yes. She said, what do I do? I said, walk in, stand straight, let Kayla run it, do not fill silence with words. She nodded. She said, one more question. I said, go ahead. She said, the dent. After Marin, after all of it, do you ever think about stopping, about putting the armor down for the last time and not picking it back up? I looked at the left pauldron, the dent from Marin. I said, I think about it the same way I think about the wrong flavor ration bar I ate 20 minutes ago. I notice it, I make a note, and then I figure out where I am going next. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "You got the wrong flavor." I said, "Mixed up the packets this morning, should have checked." She laughed, a real one, short and surprised and without any performance in it at all. The kind of laugh that happens when something is genuinely funny and your body responds before you have time to decide whether the moment calls for it. I said, "Ready." She said, "Ready." I pushed the door open. The ceremony hall was exactly as I had left it. 400 voices, 32 species. The dome above showing the star field in full color, the same stars that had been there when I walked out, the same ones that had been there for 1,000,000 years before anyone named them, and would be there long after the names were forgotten. The room noticed us, both of us. The 400 adjusted in the way rooms adjust when a door opens, and something they were not sure was coming back has come back. Kayla was standing near the center of the floor. She looked at Zara for 1 second and then at me. Her radiance was steady, back to the level it had been during her opening circuit of the room. I walked to my position, near the outer edge of the floor. I had a clear view of all 4 entry points. I ran my thumb once across the dent in the left pauldron. Then I put both hands at my sides and looked at the room and was exactly where I had agreed to be. Zara straightened beside me, her radiance quiet and steady, and took her own position. Kayla began speaking. The summit continued. That is the story I carry, not in the armor, which is just metal and composite and stitching that has been repaired in the field more times than I can accurately count. I carry it in the record of every morning I put it on and chose the limits and walked into the room anyway. The record of 19 years of keeping the agreement even when the agreement was being tested, and especially when it was not convenient, and most especially when someone who did not yet understand what they were looking at asked me to put it down. The armor goes back on one more time. It goes back on because the alternative is the other thing, and the other thing has no use for summits or star fields or 22-year-old princesses learning what the universe is actually built from. I put it on for the room. I take it off to remind them. And then I put it back on, because that is what the agreement asks. And because I keep my agreements. Every day so far.